In the summer of 1990, Gainesville, Florida was known for its vibrant college scene, with the University of Florida at its heart. But as students prepared to return for the fall semester, a malevolent force was lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. This seemingly peaceful community had become the hunting ground for a sadistic killer. Officer Ray Barber from the Gainesville Police Department arrived at the Williamsburg Village Apartments, where he met the caretaker. He was told that the parents of a 17-year-old student were anxious about her safety, as they had not heard from her in a couple of days. Officer Barber had experienced similar call-outs before, and it usually turned out to be nothing, as students enjoy newfound freedom and often forget to check in with family and friends. However, when Barber learned that Christina Powell's car was in the parking lot and no one had seen or heard from her, he grew concerned. Nothing could prepare him for the scene inside the apartment Christina shared with a fellow student, Sonia Larson. After breaking down the door, the smell of human decay overwhelmed him. On entering, he discovered both girls had been brutally murdered and mutilated. This is a story that shook the quiet college town to its core, leaving a trail of terror, death, and destruction in its wake. The once peaceful town was dubbed Grisly Gainesville, and students fled to the safety of their homes in droves. This is the dark and disturbing case of the crimes and investigation that led to the eventual capture of the Gainesville Ripper. You are listening to The Evidence Locker. If you prefer an ad-free experience, you can find us on Patreon, with plans starting at just $2 a month. Plus, 25% of all Patreon proceeds go directly to the Dome Network. Our episodes cover true crimes involving real people, and some content may be graphic in nature. Listener discretion is advised. We produce each episode with the utmost respect for the victims, their families, and loved ones. Gainesville, with its tree-lined streets and picturesque neighborhoods, seemed like the last place anyone would expect a serial killer to strike. But of course, evil knows no boundaries. In August 1990, the quietude of this college town was shattered when the first victims were discovered in their off-campus apartment. Their names were Sonia Larson and Christina Powell, two bright and promising young women who had recently enrolled at the University of Florida. Sonia Larson was a young woman whose life held immense promise. Born on January 21st, 1972, she was just 18 years old at the time of her brutal murder. Sonia was originally from Deerfield Beach, Florida, and was described as a vivacious and ambitious young woman with a bright future ahead of her. She hoped to complete a degree in elementary education at the University of Florida in Gainesville, one of the state's premier educational institutions. Like many young students, Sonia had moved away from home to Gainesville to attend college. Sonia met fellow student Christina Powell, originally from Jacksonville, who had enrolled to study nursing. Christina, or Christy as everyone called her, was known for her warm and friendly personality, which made her popular among friends and family. Sonia and Christy looked for a place to share and settled on a spot off campus at the Williamsburg Apartments, moving in on the 24th of August, 1990. The next morning, when Christy's sister and brother-in-law arrived with their bedding and some of her things, they were surprised to find no one at home. They left a couple of notes on the door, asking Christy to call, but the call never came. With no news from either of the girls, Christy's parents went to the apartment to see what was going on. No one answered the door, but they insisted that a maintenance worker open the apartment. Concerned about what they might find, the worker called police and asked if they could conduct a welfare check. Once inside, they discovered the awful truth of what had happened to the girls. First, they found Sonia's body on her bed, with multiple stab wounds. That was enough to send the maintenance worker out, screaming and vomiting in shock. Christy's parents, who were waiting on the stairs, saw the man and realized then something was terribly wrong. Christy was downstairs. Her breasts had been mutilated, and she had been stabbed to death. Sonia was on her waterbed and had similar injuries. Both girls had been sexually assaulted. Sonia's hair was fanned out and her arms outstretched, like someone had posed her body after killing her. Their murders marked the beginning of a nightmare that would grip the town for weeks to come. The manner in which they were found posed in a grotesque manner in their off-campus apartment shocked even the most hardened of police officers. As investigators worked tirelessly to make sense of the horrific murders, the killer struck again. This time, the body of 18-year-old Krista Hoyt, another student at the University of Florida, was discovered in her apartment, a mere 8 hours after the bodies of Sonia and Christy were found. Born on November 20th, 1971, Krista Hoyt was originally from Archer, Florida. She had moved to Gainesville to attend Santa Fe Community College. Krista was studying to become a nurse, and her compassion for others and her desire to make a positive impact on the world were evident in her dedication as a student. Her friends and family described her as a vibrant and ambitious young woman with a zest for life. When Krista did not show up to her part-time job as a records clerk at a local police station, 2 officers were sent to check on her. It was very unusual for Krista to be late, let alone being a no-show. Nothing could prepare them for what they found at Krista's home. Her mutilated, beheaded body lay in her bedroom, and her head was placed on top of a dresser facing the door. The killer's method was chillingly consistent. Like Sonia and Christy, Krista had been sexually tortured and stabbed to death. The crime scene also exhibited the same disturbing and ritualistic elements. He left his victims in grotesque, imposed positions. Panic spread through Gainesville like wildfire, and the police were inundated with tips and leads from concerned residents and students. With 3 young women brutally murdered in the span of a few hours, the town was gripped by fear. Everyone wanted to know if there was a serial killer on the prowl in their town. The Gainesville Ripper, as the media would soon dub him, had entered the scene, and everybody feared he would strike again. Gainesville was in turmoil, and the pressure was on for law enforcement to catch the perpetrator before he could claim more victims. The city was in desperate need of answers, and the police were determined to provide them. The investigation into the Gainesville Ripper's crimes was one of the most intense and high-stakes manhunts in Florida history. The local police department, alongside state and federal agencies, formed a task force to bring this ruthless killer to justice. Every resource was thrown into the case, and investigators began combing through the evidence in a race against time. The first day of fall term was coming up, and there was a large influx of young people in town. The murders hit very close to home, and some students decided to return home to their parents until further notice. Failing to capture the elusive killer, it was time for investigators to go back to the drawing board. The crime scenes provided crucial clues, and forensic evidence was meticulously collected and analyzed. At Sonia and Chrissy's apartment, there were signs of forced entry. The intruder used a screwdriver or a similar tool to force the front door open. Gainesville residents were not about to bow to the reign of terror caused by the faceless killer. Instead, they rallied together, forming neighborhood watch groups and taking extra precautions to ensure their safety. The people of Gainesville were determined to help law enforcement in any way they could to catch this vicious predator. On August 27, 1990, just days after the discovery of the third victim, Krista Hoyt, a break in the case finally came. However, it would take police a while before they were able to link a robbery to the murders. The police were looking for 2 drifters suspected of robbing a bank in Ocala, Florida, which was just a short drive from Gainesville. Interestingly, in their pursuit, officers discovered the man's tent in the woods. There they found damning evidence, a gun, and the ink-stained money he had stolen. All items were confiscated and logged. At this point, it was a slam dunk with regards to the robbery case. However, they did not realize at the time how significant this campsite would become in the Gainesville Ripper case. Fortunately, police were able to detain one of the suspects, while the other one got away. During questioning, he claimed the name of his accomplice was Mike Kennedy. Police released an APB, and within 2 weeks on September 7th, Kennedy was arrested. Meanwhile, classes were running on full schedule at the University of Florida. Students were nervous but tried their best to stick to regular routines. But the undercurrent of fear was palpable. 23-year-old Tracy Pauls and Manuel Manny Tabawara were good friends from high school. Tracy was studying occupational therapy and Manny architecture. When they returned to Gainesville from Miami to resume their studies, they decided to rent an apartment together at a complex called Gatorwood. When Tracy's mom heard about the murders in Gainesville, she was understandably nervous. She immediately called Tracy and warned her, pleading with her to be vigilant and safe. Sadly, 2 hours later, Tracy was killed. When Tracy's mom could not get a hold of her later that day, she asked a friend to check on her, but it was too late. Tracy and Manny had both been brutally murdered inside their apartment. Evidence showed that Manny was killed first, after putting up a violent fight for his and Tracy's lives. Sadly, the perpetrator overpowered him and stabbed him to death. Tracy was then raped and stabbed, in the same fashion as the other victims. In the span of 3 days, 5 students had been murdered. Mass panic broke out, with gun sales going through the roof, and dorms running empty with people leaving town until the killer was caught. Police looked at similarities in the crime scenes. Significantly, each apartment complex was located next to the woods. The perpetrator entered through a back door, forcing it open with a screwdriver. The killer came prepared with a murder weapon, a knife. During the attacks, his brutality knew no bounds. And even after he killed his victims, he took his time mutilating and posing their lifeless bodies. He bound them with duct tape and used dishwashing detergent and water in an attempt to clean the scenes. The attempted cleanup and the fact that an Army-style survival knife was used in commission of the murders made law enforcement wonder if the killer had some knowledge of investigation or forensics. Police were under tremendous pressure and worked around the clock to bring the killer to justice. One line of inquiry led them to a University of Florida freshman, Ed Humphrey. He was known to have had mental health issues, for which he was on medication. Multiple callers called police hotlines reporting suspicious behavior by Ed. Also, he lived with his grandmother in the same complex as Tracy Pauls and Manny Tabawada. Reportedly, Ed had stopped taking his medication and took to the woods, lurking around in camouflage clothing. He threatened his grandmother, and police felt there was a strong chance he was their killer. Ed was bipolar and was suffering an episode during which he stopped using his meds. Police felt they had enough circumstantial evidence to arrest him. With Humphrey in custody, no more murders occurred, and everyone believed that police had finally caught the Gainesville Ripper. He was demonized, and the fact that he had scars on his face from a motor vehicle accident some years earlier made him look rather scary, which fueled fear and judgment by the public. However, police needed physical evidence to prove that he was indeed their guy, and they came up empty. So after 5 months in custody, he was released. Forensic tests were run on semen samples left at the crime scenes, which proved the killer's blood type was B. However, Ed Humphrey had type A. This was very unsettling because if Humphrey wasn't their killer, who was? And worse, was he still out there? His first arrest was not to be Ed's last brush with the law. In October of the same year, he was in custody again, this time following the assault on his grandmother, and was sentenced to serve time in a mental facility. Gainesville police were desperate to put the Gainesville Ripper behind bars and called in the help of the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, VICAP. This database logged crime scene evidence and linked facts and elements together in crime scenes that might appear to be unrelated. And they hit pay dirt. Police from Shreveport, Louisiana had an unsolved triple murder from the year before. The Grissom family, Tom, Julie, and Sean, were stabbed to death inside their home in November 1989. Tom and his grandson Sean were left to die in the living room. Julie's body was discovered in the bedroom, laying naked on the bed, mutilated. Her hair had been spread out around her head, eerily similar to the way in which Sonia Larson was found in Gainesville. Also, the killer tried to clean the crime scene with soap and water. Julie's clothes were in the washing machine and had been washed. And as Gainesville residents' efforts to stay vigilant continued, the investigation finally seemed to move forward. But police were careful not to reveal too much to the media about their new line of investigation. They looked into criminal records, trying to establish if any offenders from Louisiana found themselves in Florida. That is when they learned that the man they had in custody for the bank robbery in Ocala was wanted in Shreveport for attempted murder of his father. This was the man identified by his fellow bank robber as Mike Kennedy. The man was, in fact, a Louisiana local who had relocated to Florida named Danny Rolling. As they delved into Rolling's background, they uncovered a chilling history. Rolling had a troubled past, marred by violence. Daniel Harold Rolling was born on May 26, 1954, in Shreveport. His early life was marked by dysfunction and violence, as his father James Rolling Sr. was a highly abusive figure. Young Danny witnessed his father's violent outbursts, often directed at his mother, Claudia Rolling. On one occasion, James, who worked as a police officer, disciplined Danny by handcuffing him and asking fellow police officers to take his son away, and he was embarrassed by him. Another time, James took his rage out on Danny's dog, who ended up dying in his arms. To say Danny Rolling's childhood was like living inside of a hurricane would be an understatement. He struggled with a tumultuous family life, and his father's abusive behavior had a lasting impact on him. As he grew older, Danny began to exhibit disturbing tendencies of his own. As a young teen, Danny went into the woods near his house and masturbated as he fantasized about overpowering women. He became infatuated with the opposite sex, and at age 14, Danny was caught peeping into the window of a neighbor's daughter. When James Rolling found out about this, he gave his son a violent beating. Rolling's descent into criminality began in his late teens, when he was arrested for a series of burglaries. He spent time in and out of prison for various offenses, including armed robbery and violence against women. As soon as Danny finished his GED, he was ready to leave home and get as far away from Shreveport as possible. He enlisted in the Air Force, and for a moment, it seemed like he had turned things around. But this was far from the truth. Danny began using drugs, and soon, it was no longer recreational. He was a heavy user of acid, and it affected his daily work. It came as no surprise when he was honorably discharged. Out of options, Danny moved back to Shreveport, where he lived with his grandfather. During this time, he joined the church and became feverishly religious. He claimed religion gave him a new sense of peace. However, this too was not to last. As Rolling continued his life of crime, he also developed a fascination with the macabre. He immersed himself in the world of horror literature and began to experiment with drugs, which further exacerbated his unstable behavior and violent tendencies. After an argument with his father in the spring of 1990, during which he shot his dad, Rolling fled Louisiana. A fellow church member from Shreveport, Cindy Juricic, informed police that something seemed off about Danny. Shortly after the Grissom family murders, Danny told Cindy's husband that he had a problem, that he liked to stick knives into people. He reportedly told her, "One day, I'm going to leave this town, and I'm going to go where the girls are beautiful, and I could just lay in the sun and watch beautiful women all day." Cindy suspected that he had moved to Florida, and when she heard about the murders, she had an uneasy feeling, which made her reach out to Crime Stoppers in November 1990. Danny had indeed run away to Florida, where he became a drifter, constantly on the move and often living a transient lifestyle. He had a knack for landing in trouble with the law, and his criminal record began to accumulate with offenses ranging from robbery to theft. With this insightful information about Rolling's violent past, investigators had a second look at evidence recovered at his residence, the makeshift campsite in the woods near Gainesville. The screwdriver used to gain access was among his belongings. Also in the evidence room, they found a cassette recorder with a cassette inside. No one had listened to this, as it was deemed insignificant in the robbery case. However, the audio content on this cassette was very unsettling. It was Rolling's taped audio journal in which he detailed his thoughts, fantasies, and plans related to the murders. The musings were graphic and revealed a deeply disturbed mind. It provided investigators with a direct link between Rolling and the crimes, as he had recorded himself speaking about the murders in gruesome detail. It was a chilling glimpse into the mind of a man who had terrorized Gainesville for weeks. With this mountain of evidence in their possession, investigators had every theory needed to build a solid case against Daniel Harold Rolling. They were able to conclude that although he had a history of robbery, assault, and voyeurism charges, it was in Gainesville that Rolling's twisted fantasies would come to life as he embarked on a horrifying killing spree that terrorized the community and left 5 young people dead. The crimes committed by Danny Rolling were not only brutal, but also methodical, indicating a level of depravity that few could comprehend. The identification of Rolling as a prime suspect brought a momentary sense of relief to the terrified town. But it also marked the beginning of a long and grueling legal process. Rolling did not admit to anything, but he agreed to providing a blood sample. When test results came back, it was a smoking gun. His blood type was B, the same as the semen samples found at the crime scenes. And ultimately, his DNA matched, linking him to the scenes without a shadow of a doubt. In November 1991, Daniel Harold Rolling was formally charged with the murders of Sonia Larson, Christina Powell, Krista Hoyt, Tracy Pauls, and Manuel Tabawada. If found guilty, he would have faced the death penalty. A month before his trial kicked off, he reached out to law enforcement, claiming that he was ready to talk. He made a strange offer, saying that he was ready to confess, but would only do so through his cellmate. Accepting his offer, police were able to extract a confession to all 5 murders from the man known as the Gainesville Ripper. When asked about his motive, he claimed that his goal was to kill 8 people. Revenge for the 8 years he spent in prisons throughout his life. The 5 victims from Gainesville and the 3 from the Grissom family in Shreveport add up to 8. However, he refused to say anything about the Grissom triple homicide. During his confession, some gruesome details about his crimes emerged. Rolling said that after ending Krista Hoyt's life, he returned to his tent and then discovered he had left his wallet at Krista's apartment. He went back, and this is when he continued mutilating her body, eventually decapitating her. By placing her head on the shelf to face her body, he hoped to shock whoever discovered her. Rolling's trial was a media circus, with journalists from all over the country descending upon Gainesville to cover the proceedings. The prosecution built a compelling case against Rolling, presenting the evidence found at his campsite, the disturbing journal, painting a vivid picture of a remorseless and sadistic killer. It became clear that the Gainesville Ripper wasn't just a cold-blooded killer, but a man deeply tormented by his own demons, a man who had unleashed his darkest fantasies upon innocent victims. Rolling's defense team attempted to argue that he was mentally ill, but the overwhelming evidence against him proved insurmountable. In the end, the court was shocked to hear a direct confession from Rolling himself. He said, "I've been running from first one thing and then another all my life. But there are some things that you just can't run from. I believe this being one of those." The trial of Daniel Harold Rolling lasted for weeks, and the people of Gainesville held their breath as they awaited the verdict. Finally, on April 20th, 1994, the jury delivered their judgment. The verdict was swift and unequivocal, guilty on all counts. Daniel Harold Rolling was sentenced to death for the murders of Sonia Larson, Christina Powell, Krista Hoyt, Tracy Pauls, and Manuel Tabawada. The verdict brought a sense of closure to the victims' families and to the entire community. Gainesville could finally begin to heal and move forward, knowing that the Gainesville Ripper would never again pose a threat to their town. However, the scars left by these brutal crimes would linger for years to come. But the Gainesville Ripper case did not end with Rolling's conviction. In the aftermath of his arrest, questions lingered about how such a dangerous individual had managed to slip through the cracks of the criminal justice system repeatedly. What could have been done to prevent these heinous crimes? One of the most haunting aspects of this case was the fact that Daniel Harold Rolling had been on law enforcement's radar long before the Gainesville murders. His criminal record was littered with violent offenses, and he had shown a propensity for targeting women. Yet he had managed to evade capture until it was too late. Some critics argued that the system failed the victims of the Gainesville Ripper, as Rolling had been released from prison just months before the murders. They questioned whether stricter sentencing and more comprehensive mental health evaluations could have prevented this tragedy. Others argue that the Gainesville Ripper's case proved challenges law enforcement faces when dealing with transient individuals who move from place to place, often leaving a trail of crime in their wake. Rolling's ability to evade capture for so long is a testament to the difficulties of tracking and apprehending such criminals. Thanks to DNA evidence, law enforcement was able to conclusively link Rolling to the Grissom murders as well. Another crime also came to light. On August 5, 1990, Rowling broke into the Sarasota home of Janet Frake. He bound her with duct tape before raping her. Authorities were not sure why he spared her life, however. In 1996, Rowling released a book called The Making of a Serial Killer, the real story of the Gainesville student murders in the killer's own words. This collaboration with author Sandra London led to a romance, and eventually an engagement. Rowling's execution took place on October 25, 2006 by lethal injection. In his last conversation with his spiritual advisor, he finally confessed to the Grissom family murder. He then sang a hymn to the onlookers, including family members of his victims. He offered no apology and showed no remorse. Outside the prison walls, State Attorney Bill Cervone addressed anti-death penalty protesters by saying, "Ever since Rowling was imprisoned under sentence of death, he still cast a shadow on our community. This execution has removed that shadow." Pop culture immortalized the story of Rowling's reign of terror, as he has been called the real-life killer who inspired the slasher film series Scream. Unfortunately, truth remains stranger than fiction. If you'd like to dive deeper into this case, check out the resources we used for this episode in the show notes. Don't forget to follow us on social media for more updates on today's case. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and X. We also have a channel on YouTube where you can watch more content. If you enjoy what we do here at Evidence Locker, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening right now, and consider leaving us a 5-star review. This is the Evidence Locker. Thank you for listening.